Hey everybody, Jack Loves Painting here with a new painting tutorial, the first painting tutorial of 2020. We're going to be doing some speed painting on this Deathwing Knight. And you might recognize this guy. He was one of the models we did some battle damage on in our last video with the battle damage conversion tutorial. And I'm going to show you guys a super fast, easy way to paint a bunch of these guys with some different techniques. So let's start off with what we're using. I'm going to be using a colored primer. This is Desert Sand from AK Interactive. I've also got grayish yellow and RAL creme weiss. These are going to be the three colors for our Deathwing bone armor. I've also got signal green and deep green. These are going to be the green for our robes, and I have warm skin tone and burnt sand, and these are going to be the two colors for his face. I'm also trying out a new metallic. This is bronze from AK Interactive, and we're going to use this for all of our gold stuff. Everything else I use is just going to be user's choice with some reds and some steel colors and maybe some black paint here and there. First things first, we're going to prime this guy. I've got the Desert Sand straight out of the bottle into the airbrush. That's how it's meant to be used. It is airbrush ready, and I'm just going to do a 100% opaque prime coat on our Deathwing Terminator here. Just make sure that when you're doing this, you don't build up the primer too thick and wet. We don't want it to run or lose any details. So take your time, do multiple thin passes with the airbrush to get that primer coat on there. Alright, now that our primer is dried up, we're going to start creating our bone colors. And we're going to start off by spraying a light highlight with this grayish yellow. These two colors, the grayish yellow and the creme weiss, are fairly similar in color brightness and shade. So all I'm doing is just doing some light coats, leaving that desert sand peeking through in the recesses and creating a sort of modulated bone color effect. We're not going super high contrast or anything like that, just sort of high spray angles, that sort of thing, to create some shadows and highlights. Remember, we're going for speed, so I'm not going to be sitting there wasting time by doing like laser airbrush highlights on these guys. I want this tutorial to be more beginner friendly, so you don't need really any skill with the airbrush other than controlling your trigger enough not to just blast wet paint all over this thing. You don't really need to focus any one area, just maintain a 45-degree or higher spray angle when you're laying down these colors. Now I'm going to work with the greens, starting off with deep green, and you can see that I've got the sort of front plate slash headpiece, the robe. It's like a sub-assembly. So I've broken up all the Deathwing Knights into sub-assemblies so that I can airbrush the armor and also airbrush our robes, because those are the two biggest pieces of the model. And we can have nice clean airbrush highlights for those, and it saves an absolute ton of time. Next, I'm going to grab the signal green, give a light highlight to that green robe, making sure that deep green is showing through in the recessed details. Again, you don't need to laser focus your highlights with the airbrush. This is a very beginner friendly technique. Now we're going to get into some hand painting, and again, this is user's choice for this color. I'm just using a darker steel color. This is dark silver from Pro Acryl, if you have that. If not, use whichever steel color you have, and we're just going to block in all of the stuff that you want to be a steel color on your models. Just bang it out, batch painting, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Super easy stuff. For the sections on the armor, make sure that you're taking enough time to slow down and not be sloppy. So speed painting is not synonymous with sloppy. You don't get a free pass to just slop paint everywhere. It's about managing your time so that you're not wasting it when you're painting these. And we're also not doing a lot of techniques that are time intensive. So very easy, cleanly executed techniques to have some good looking models come out really fast. After that, I'm going to bust out the bronze from AK Interactive, and I'm just going to cut in everything on the model that I want to be a brassy gold color. Super, super easy. Again, just make sure that even though we're working fast, we're not working sloppily. You don't want to be slopping paint everywhere. Next, we're going to paint his face. I've got this dark sand. I'm going to thin that out with a little bit of water and just do a solid base coat. I think it took me a couple of coats to do this, especially over a darker base color like the green that was sprayed on his face with the airbrush. So just take your time, but not too much because we're speed painting. We just want a solid base coat. And then I'm going to grab the warm skin tone, thin that out a little bit, and do a couple of quick highlights on the biggest details. Not much of his face is showing under this hood, so I'm just focusing on things like the nose, the cheekbones, the mouth, and chin. Just some light, thin highlights there. It doesn't need to be anything too crazy. We just want a little bit of a shade with the dark sand and a little bit of a highlight with the warm skin tone. Next, I'm going to block in everything that is red on our models with some burnt red. This is one of those user's choice colors. You can use any dark or mid-tone red that you want. It's really easy to paint a color like this over the bone color that everything has been sprayed because you're not trying to cover something that is darker than the paint that we're using. So you can paint really fast with thin paint and it covers really good. But you do have to be careful that you're not painting too thin because you will have some light splotchy spots that'll show up underneath your coat of whatever color you want. So in this case, red. You do want to make sure that you're doing a couple of thin coats so that you're not having that bone color splotchiness show through. You do want a nice even coat, but you don't have to work in as many coats or in as thick of a coat as you normally would painting over a darker base color. Next, I'm going to grab some black brown, and this is probably one of our biggest time-saving techniques, and we're just going to do paint chipping on this guy. No edge highlights, none of that kind of stuff. We're going to do paint chipping instead. So if you are one of those painters that has shaky hands, or you've never been able to master doing clean edge highlights, this is the technique for you. Again, I'm not giving you a license to be sloppy. You do want to pick and choose where you are placing these little dots and dashes and blotches on the leading edges of his armor plates, but you don't have to be laser accurate and draw these super clean lines on your edges because we're not edge highlighting. We're just creating a shadow that is mimicking the effect of paint chipping on his bright armor. The black-brown creates a warmer shadow that goes well with the warm off-white colors of his bone armor. And so I'm just creating little scratches and little blotches and paint chips on the leading edges of his armor. And I'm also coloring in areas that we did our battle damage on, like the big gouges and chips in his armor and those bullet holes and divots. Kind of near the end of this process, I was using my little detail brush with some of that dried paint on there to create little impact points with lots of little teeny tiny paint chips and then pull it down real fast to create sort of a streak for scratches and streaking. So if you're worried about being able to do those hairline little scratches and chips, just use it almost like a dry brush. Just load up your paint, get most of it out of there on a paper towel or something like that, and then you can use it almost like a dry brush to create those little streaks and scratches. After that step, I'm going to come back with some bright silver or a shiny steel color of your choice, and I'm going to paint that into some of the biggest areas of paint chipping and battle damage. Not every single little paint chip, just the bigger ones, the big scratches, the big gouges in the armor, that sort of thing, and just put some of that silver into those bits of battle damage to show where some of this paint has chipped off to sort of a like industrial primer level, and some of the battle damage has gone straight down into the bare metal, and you can see that shiny scratched metal. Next comes the washes. We're using the Mr. Hobby Mr. Weathering Oil Wash system. And what I have done is taken some of our Mr. Hobby solvent that is part of this system. I've put it in my little tray there, which is just an old juice bottle lid, and diluted some of our multi-black into that solvent so that when I put it on there, it is already sort of pre-diluted and wants to flow over the model much easier. And I also waste a lot less multi-black doing it this way. I just pour some of the solvent in there, then dip my brush repeatedly into the multi-black to bring that over into the little tray and stir it up. And then, as per usual, once we slop it all over there, we're going to use our brush and some clean solvent to further dilute it to get it to flow into the recesses and clean it off of our big flat armor plates. I personally like using a brush, but sometimes you might need to use like a bit of paper towel or perhaps a cotton swab. Near the end of this process, I do pull out a cotton swab because one of the cool things about using the cotton swab is it wicks away more of the liquid than a brush will, so it's easier to create streaking and also to clean up big flat armor plates that way. I do recommend getting hobby type Q-tips rather than store-bought ones for cleaning your ears, because the store-bought ones that are for like cleaning your ears and stuff like that, they fray very, very easily. They're not really meant for this. So you can get little cotton stringies on your model that you then have to pick off once the wash is dry. So just be aware of that. Again, I personally like using the brushes because it's easier for me to blend it that way, but to each their own. Whichever works easiest for you, just do that. After I did the multi-black, I came back with a little bit of stained brown and put that in some random areas, usually around the hands and the feet, and some of the bigger detail areas that are going to hold more things like grime and rust and that sort of thing. I like the stained brown for creating a grimy, rusty effect. It also stains the bone armor just a little bit. Just helps it look more grim, dark, and dirty. And the last step is I'm going to get some black paint in my airbrush. I think I'm just using black primer. I just put some of my Stynylrez black primer in there. And I'm going to lightly, very, very lightly, spray some black paint around the biggest areas of weathering, like these big bullet gouges in his armor and the big battle damage areas on his shield where he's taken like power sword hits or got hit with a las cannon or something like that, where it's this big, meaty, energy type impact, and create a little bit of carbon scoring around those areas using the black paint in my airbrush. And this is sort of a finesse technique, so if you don't feel comfortable with doing this, just feel free to leave it out. You do have to have some pretty fine trigger control not to just blast black paint on there. So to create that sort of transparent effect of the burns and carbon scoring, you do need a little bit of control. So totally optional, up to you. I like the way it looks, so I did it on mine. Hope you guys enjoyed this speed painting tutorial. I had a timer running next to me on the desk. I think all told, it took me about 40 minutes to paint this one model. And obviously I was filming, so if you are doing it in batch painting, you don't have to wait so long for dry times. And since you're not filming, it should take you even faster to paint a full squad. See ya next time.